He was just passing through a snowstorm, headed back to the hometown he swore he'd never return to. But then, he slammed on the brakes. A golden retriever, battered, freezing, lay on the side of the road. One name slipped from his lips. Rusty. The dog looked up and wagged his tail. But if this dog was really his childhood best friend, why was he still alive? And what dark secret had kept him hidden all these years? The sky above Bozeman, Montana, was blanketed in heavy winter clouds, smudged and pale like the ash of a dying fire. It was early evening, though the light had already faded into a cold steel gray. Snow fell in thick curtains, erasing the edges of the world as Lucas Miller tightened his grip on the steering wheel and leaned forward to peer through the slush-covered windshield. The two-lane road stretched ahead like a forgotten memory, long, winding, and lined with pine trees bending under the weight of the storm. It had been 6 years since he left Bozeman. 6 years of avoiding holidays, unopened letters, and phone calls he let go to voicemail. Now, at 28, Lucas was returning not for reconciliation, but for paperwork. A final obligation after the death of the only woman who truly raised him, his grandmother. Lucas was tall and slender, with a perpetually tired expression that made him seem older than he was. His dark green eyes were usually hidden behind thick lashes and a furrowed brow, as if he were always thinking his way out of something. His hands, pale and calloused from long hours at a laptop, gripped the wheel tightly. A Denver software engineer with a mild stutter and no social life, Lucas found it easier to talk to machines than people. He liked structure, predictability. Bozeman, with its buried grief and unfinished memories, was the opposite of all that. The heater in the rented Subaru was slow to catch up with the cold. Lucas turned it to high and rubbed his fingers together. He was less than 15 minutes from his grandmother's house on the north side of town when he spotted something dark ahead, just off the road, lying on the snow. A lump. He slowed, squinting through the windshield. A deer? A bag of garbage? No. It moved. Lucas pulled onto the icy shoulder and switched on the hazards. The snow hissed beneath the tires. He stepped out cautiously, drawing the collar of his coat tight around his neck. Wind cut at his face like glass. The cold was the kind that sliced down to the bone, and the air carried the sharp, clean scent of pine and frost. As he approached, the shape became clearer. A dog. Golden-colored, curled into itself, ribs pressing against its sides like scaffolding. Patches of fur were matted and frozen. Its legs were tucked awkwardly, one of them twisted, and snow clung to its paws like old bandages. Lucas crouched slowly, his breath clouding the air between them. The dog stirred slightly, eyes opening just enough to see him, and in that instant, those eyes met his, tired and dull, but with something buried deep inside. Recognition? Lucas's chest clenched. His voice came out low, hoarse, and unplanned. "Rusty?" The dog twitched. His ears flicked faintly. His tail, almost imperceptibly, gave a slow, weak thump against the snow. Lucas froze. It couldn't be. Rusty had been his dog, his shadow, for nearly a decade. He had grown up with him, from awkward middle school days to senior year of college. After the accident that took his father, Rusty had disappeared. They searched, of course, but no trace. Everyone assumed the old retriever had run into the woods, maybe to die in peace. It had been 6 years. Rusty would be 10 now, and here he was, broken, frozen, and still alive. Lucas dropped to his knees. "You remember me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. The dog's breath fogged the air once, twice, and then he shifted his head to rest against Lucas's palm. Lucas didn't think. He didn't plan. He unzipped his jacket, slipped out of it, and wrapped it around the dog's frail frame. "I've got you," he said. His throat tightened. "I've got you." The wind howled behind them, but Lucas didn't feel it anymore. Carefully, slowly, he lifted the dog into his arms. The retriever was lighter than expected. Too light. Lucas cradled him like something holy, made his way back to the car, and eased him into the passenger seat, laying the jacket over him. The dog didn't protest, just stared at the dashboard, his eyes flicking toward Lucas every few seconds like he was checking to make sure he was real. Lucas slid behind the wheel, hand trembling slightly as he restarted the engine. He should go straight to the house. The utilities might not be on, and he had no supplies for a dog, let alone an injured one. But even as the thoughts lined up in his head like code to troubleshoot, another part of him, older, deeper, pushed back. He turned off the main road. There was an old roadside lodge on the way into town, near the river bend. His grandmother used to take him there on snowy weekends when the furnace at home gave out. The place was rustic but warm, quiet, tucked away from the eyes of the world. Lucas didn't know exactly why he was going there. Maybe because the house felt too heavy to face tonight. Maybe because that lodge had once been safe. Or maybe because for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking like a man with a plan. He was just moving on instinct. The road ahead blurred slightly through the tears forming in his eyes. He blinked them away and reached over, laying a hand gently on the dog's head. Rusty closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. Lucas swallowed the knot in his throat and whispered, "You came back." But he knew, deep down, that Rusty had never truly left. The snow hadn't let up. If anything, it was falling harder now, blanketing the world in relentless white, as Lucas turned off the main road and onto a narrow gravel path, nearly hidden beneath the drift. The tires of the Subaru crunched over frozen slush and ice. He squinted to make out the faint glow of a wooden sign ahead. Sage Hollow Lodge. Letters faded, but familiar. Nestled at the edge of a small evergreen forest, the lodge was a rustic single-level building made of old timber and gray stone, its peaked roof heavy with snow. Smoke curled lazily from one chimney, barely visible in the wind. Lucas pulled into the near-empty lot and parked beneath a snow-caked pine. The engine ticked as it cooled. For a moment, he just sat there, watching the dog in the passenger seat. Rusty had curled slightly on the jacket, his breathing shallow but steady. His paws twitched occasionally, and his fur had started to dry at the tips, though most of it was still damp and tangled. His once vibrant golden coat had dulled into an ashy beige, and there was a streak of frost still clinging to the base of his tail. Yet somehow, he looked peaceful. Lucas wasn't sure how long he stared before the cold seeped too deep into his fingers, and he reached for the door handle. Inside the main lodge, the air was warmer than expected, heavy with the scent of old cedar, wood smoke, and something vaguely sweet. Maple, maybe, or cinnamon. A small lobby sat just beyond the entrance, decorated with mismatched armchairs, vintage ski posters, and a dusty bookshelf half filled with old paperbacks. Behind the check-in counter stood a woman in her late 50s with short, curly auburn hair and a broad-shouldered build. Her name tag read Marge. She wore a wool cardigan with deer patterns and had a stern but tired face, the kind that looked like it had spent years not putting up with nonsense. She looked up as Lucas entered, holding the limp dog in his arms, and her expression shifted from suspicion to concern. "Trouble?" she asked, voice gravelly but not unkind. Lucas shifted Rusty slightly in his arms. "He's injured. I found him on the road. I think he's mine. From years ago." Marge squinted. Her eyes were pale blue and deeply lined at the corners. "Well," she said after a beat, "you picked the right place. Room 4's got the best heat. Easy access, no stairs. That work?" Lucas nodded. "Thank you. I'll pay whatever." "$75, she replied simply, reaching for a large key hanging from a wooden board. "I don't allow dogs, but I'll make an exception. He doesn't look like he's causing any trouble." Lucas handed over his card with one hand while balancing the dog in the other. Marge swiped it, scribbled something in a ledger, and handed him the key. "Need anything else? Extra blankets? Towels?" Towels would help. She disappeared into the back and returned with a stack of thick, faded towels. "Don't let him near the fireplace too close until he's dry. I've seen coat steam, but I've also seen fur catch." She paused. "What's his name?" Lucas swallowed. "Rusty." Marge gave a faint, unreadable smile. "Figures." Room 4 was on the far end of the hallway, past faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards. Lucas nudged the door open with his shoulder and stepped into a compact, warm space. There was a queen-size bed, a wooden dresser, a wall-mounted radiator, and, most importantly, a small wood-burning stove already glowing faintly orange. A basket of chopped firewood sat beside it, and the walls were lined with tongue and groove pine. It smelled like smoke, pine resin, and a bit of age. Lucas laid Rusty gently on a folded wool blanket near the stove, then crouched beside him and began drying the fur with slow, careful strokes. The dog didn't resist. His eyes fluttered open once or twice, but he remained quiet. Lucas worked in silence, focused on removing the icy mats from the retriever's legs, brushing gently at the clumps of debris caught in his tail and checking for cuts or deeper wounds. One paw looked swollen, and a small gash on his flank was red and raw, but not bleeding. "You really made it," Lucas whispered, "after everything." When he finally finished, he wrapped Rusty in a towel and shifted him slightly closer to the warmth, careful not to overheat him. Then he sat back against the wall, the heat seeping into his back and exhaustion settling into his bones. Outside, wind whistled against the window. The storm hadn't eased. Snow spiraled in sheets past the glass, and the trees beyond were barely visible. Lucas pulled off his gloves, ran his hand through his hair, and looked down at the dog again. The silence held them. Not awkward, not heavy, just there. He hadn't planned to feel this way. He had come back to Bozeman expecting paperwork, maybe grief in manageable doses, but not this. Not this ache in his chest, this strange, impossible reunion. He thought about the phone call 6 years ago, his uncle's voice telling him his father had died in the crash, that the dog was gone too, that everything had ended in a blink. He remembered searching the woods behind the property, calling for Rusty until his throat was hoarse. Nothing. And over time, like most things, grief had been filed away, reduced to occasional pangs, dull shadows, but not anymore. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Where did you go?" he asked, almost to himself. "How did you survive?" Rusty stirred, his ears twitched once, and his tail gave a slow, tired wag. Then he nudged his head against Lucas's boot. Light, barely there pressure. That simple touch broke something open. Lucas didn't cry, but his eyes burned. He reached out, resting a hand on Rusty's neck, feeling the warmth beneath his fingers, the quiet heartbeat that shouldn't have still been there. "Not leaving you again," he whispered. "Not this time." The storm had quieted by morning, but not by much. The light outside the lodge was a dim blue-gray, filtered through overcast clouds, and the thick crust of snow still clinging to every branch and rooftop. The world looked like it had been preserved in frost. Quiet, stiff, breathless. Inside room 4 of the Sage Hollow Lodge, however, the stove was still humming, casting a warm orange glow against the pine-paneled walls. Lucas stirred slowly from the chair he'd fallen asleep in, a wool blanket thrown over his shoulders, his neck aching from the angle. Rusty was still there, curled near the heater, his body no longer trembling from the cold. He was awake, blinking slowly, and when Lucas looked down, the dog met his gaze with a soft, tired expression. Lucas leaned forward and brushed his fingers lightly through the fur along Rusty's neck. It was still tangled in some places, but dry now, soft under his palm. It was then he noticed something strange. On the inside of the collar, worn and dark with age, there was a patch of clean leather, as though someone had recently wiped the dirt from it. Lucas tilted it to the light. Carved faintly into the collar, nearly hidden beneath the layers of grime, were the words, "Milo Haven Rescue Center." He froze. The name wasn't familiar, and definitely not his. Someone had renamed Rusty. Lucas stared at it for a long moment, lips parting slightly. Haven Rescue Center. He didn't remember any place by that name near Bozeman, but perhaps it was something newer. His chest tightened. Had someone else found Rusty after he vanished? Had they assumed he was a stray? Or, worse, had he been abandoned again? Lucas stood, grabbed his coat and hat, and carefully helped Rusty into the back seat of the Subaru with an extra blanket and a towel. The dog moved slowly but obediently, favoring his right hind leg, and settled in without protest. The snow had stopped falling, but the roads were still treacherous. Lucas drove with extra care, windshield wipers dragging across thin ice as he headed into town. Bozeman's downtown was still sleepy at this hour, stores opening late in the post-storm quiet. He turned onto 7th Avenue, where an old red brick building sat at the corner, a vet clinic with a wooden sign that read Pine Valley Animal Care. He remembered it vaguely from years ago when his grandmother brought in a barn cat for shots. A new metal ramp had been installed, and the door had been freshly painted. But otherwise, the place looked the same. Inside, the warmth was instant and sharp, smelling of disinfectant and oatmeal shampoo. The front desk was manned by a woman in her late 40s, slim and upright, with short salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read Tessa. She wore a thick green fleece and had a clipped, efficient energy, like someone who ran the clinic with precision and tolerated no nonsense. "Walk in?" she asked, glancing from Lucas to the dog he was gently lifting through the door. "Yes," Lucas replied, brushing snow off his boots. "Emergency, sort of. He's not bleeding badly, but he's worn down. And there's something I need help confirming." Tessa's face softened when she looked closer at Rusty. "Poor guy looks like he's been through a war," she murmured before calling over her shoulder. "Dr. Coyle, you're needed up front." A moment later, a second woman appeared from the back, tall and lean, with dark brown skin and wide, intelligent eyes. She wore blue scrubs under a down vest and walked with calm purpose. Dr. Hannah Coyle, in her late 30s, had the composed presence of someone who had seen every kind of animal trauma imaginable and still treated each case with gentle regard. Her posture was upright, her expression neutral but focused, and her voice when she spoke was low and warm. "What have we got?" Lucas introduced himself, keeping his voice quiet as Rusty whimpered softly in his arms. "This is... well, he used to be Rusty. Now someone's calling him Milo, apparently. I found him yesterday in the snow. He's 10, or should be. I think he's mine, but I don't know where he's been." Hannah's eyes scanned Rusty quickly. "He's definitely around that age. Let's take him back and have a look." The exam room was clean and modest, white tile floors, stainless counters, and posters about dental hygiene for dogs. Lucas laid Rusty on the padded table, staying close as Hannah checked pulse, breath, eyes, and teeth. She worked methodically, occasionally murmuring encouragement to the dog, who barely moved, but didn't resist her touch. "He's underweight by at least 15 pounds, she said, gently checking the swollen paw. "Minor lacerations here, some infection in the pads, but he's tougher than he looks." Lucas stood silently, arms crossed. "Do you have any records under the name Milo, with Haven Rescue Center?" Hannah turned to the desktop computer in the corner and tapped at the keyboard. Tessa, who had entered with a clipboard, watched over her shoulder. They clicked through several files, the silence dragging long. "No Milo in our system," Tessa said. "No Haven Rescue Center either, not even in Gallatin County's registry." Hannah frowned, leaning back. If he came from Haven, it wasn't local, or the center doesn't exist anymore. Lucas felt something cold settle in his chest. Could it be fake? Possibly. Or it was renamed, rebranded, or shut down. Hannah looked up at him. If he was adopted through legitimate channels, there should be paperwork, but the collar alone doesn't tell us much. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, taking a picture of the engraving. "I'll start searching," he said. "Thanks for checking him out." Hannah smiled gently. "He's lucky you found him when you did, another night in the cold, and we might be having a different conversation." Lucas knelt beside Rusty again, running his fingers under the dog's chin. "He's not just lucky," he murmured. "He's a survivor." The afternoon light in Bozeman was faint and colorless, filtering through layers of low-hanging clouds that looked like smeared charcoal. Snow fell again, not in the fierce flurries of the previous day, but soft and steady, a kind of silent metronome that slowed time down and made every footstep feel like a page turning in an old, forgotten book. Lucas stood outside the Pine Valley Animal Care Clinic, staring at the photo of the collar engraving on his phone, then looking toward the downtown stretch. He wasn't ready to go back to the lodge yet, not while his head was full of questions and his chest tight with doubt. Rusty rested in the back seat of the Subaru, wrapped in blankets, eyes half-lidded, but alert enough to watch Lucas's every movement through the window. His ears perked slightly when Lucas returned to the car. "We're taking a detour," Lucas said softly. "I need to know who else remembers you." Downtown Bozeman, though modest, had its share of charming storefronts. Bookshops, old diners, and winter-themed boutiques with wreaths made of pine cones and fake berries. Lucas turned onto Beekman Street and parked in front of a little candle shop tucked between a bakery and a thrift store. A wooden sign above the door read, "Kindle and Wick," painted in weathered white and lavender. Inside, the warmth was almost overwhelming. The scent of honey, pine, and vanilla hung thick in the air. Shelves lined with handmade candles flickered with subtle movement. At the counter stood an elderly woman, small and round, wrapped in a thick knit cardigan the color of dandelions. Her name tag read Irene, written in careful cursive. She had silver white hair coiled into a bun and wore wire-framed glasses that slid low on her nose. Her face, though aged, was bright and open. "Cold one today?" she said cheerfully as Lucas entered. Her voice carried the softness of someone who had lived long enough to stop rushing anything. Lucas gave a small nod. "You've lived in this town a long time, haven't you?" Irene smiled. 70 years, give or take. Which part of it are you asking about, sweetheart?" Lucas hesitated, then pulled his phone from his pocket and opened the photo of Rusty from the morning. Head resting on a towel, eyes sunken, but familiar. "Do you recognize this dog?" She leaned in, squinting. Her brows raised just slightly. "Oh, my stars," she breathed. "That's him." Lucas blinked. "You know him?" She reached under the counter and pulled out a small thermos, pouring herself tea into a chipped ceramic mug before continuing. "Every winter, every single one for at least 4, maybe 5 years now. He used to walk up Main, past the old bakery, then disappear. But always, he stopped in front of the old Miller house. Just stood there on the porch, didn't bark, didn't scratch. Just looked at the door like he was waiting for someone who forgot him." Lucas swallowed. "That's my house, my grandmother's house." Irene looked at him carefully. "Then he was waiting for you." The words hit him with quiet force, like a wind too soft to hear, but strong enough to shift snowbanks. Why didn't anyone try to take him in? "Oh, people tried," Irene said gently, "but he wouldn't let them. Slipped away every time someone got too close. We all thought he was a ghost dog or something. Some folks even said he only appeared during snow. I didn't believe that part, but now I'm not so sure." Lucas thanked her and returned to the car, the bell above the shop door jingling softly behind him. Rusty lifted his head slightly when Lucas opened the door. He slid into the driver's seat and whispered, "You waited. You really waited." He didn't drive far. 10 minutes later, he turned into the narrow gravel drive of the house he hadn't seen since he was 22. It sat at the edge of a pine grove, flanked by thick snowbanks and long-forgotten fences. The paint had faded from pale blue to gray. One of the shutters hung crooked, and the front porch creaked under even the wind's pressure. Still, it was standing, just as he remembered. Lucas sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. Snow crunched beneath his boots. He left the engine running with the heat on for Rusty, though the dog gave a low whimper when Lucas shut the door. "I'll be right back," he promised. The front door stuck slightly, then groaned open. Inside, the house smelled of dust and cold wood. Furniture was draped in white sheets, and the air was still, as if holding its breath. Lucas moved slowly through the hallway, brushing his fingers along the edge of the wallpaper, past the kitchen, the old clock, and into the narrow staircase leading to the attic. The attic had always felt like another world. As a child, he used to sit up there for hours, reading books by flashlight, building imaginary forts. It was cold now, the wooden floor stiff under his steps. Boxes were stacked neatly along one wall, labeled by his grandmother's meticulous handwriting. Most were holiday decorations, photo albums, and old kitchenware, but one box was different, smaller, unmarked. Lucas crouched beside it and opened the lid. Inside was a thin folder, yellowed slightly with age. He opened it carefully. Rusty intake and transfer documentation. His breath caught. The first page was a standard veterinary intake form, dated 6 years prior, just 3 days after his father's accident. The words at the bottom, in faded ink, read, "Transferred to Haven Behavioral Center. Requested by family member due to signs of post-trauma aggression." Lucas read it twice, then a third time. He stared at the name under requester. Martin Langley. Martin was his cousin. They hadn't spoken in years. Lucas stood slowly, folder in hand, the quiet of the attic pressing in around him like snow on a roof. The sky had darkened by the time Lucas left the old house, folder clutched tightly in his hands, the cold slicing through his coat like paper. Snow no longer fell, but a thin mist of frost drifted in the air, clinging to windshields and branches like breath held too long. The streets of Bozeman were quiet, and even the soft crunch of Lucas's boots felt like it echoed too loudly. He had no plan, only a name at the top of the intake form and a vague address scribbled on a yellowed envelope inside the folder. Walter Granger, Haven Route 8, Cabin 12. He remembered the name. His grandmother had mentioned it once in passing, years ago, referring to a Mr. Granger, who lived like a mountain ghost, alone, near the base of the Bridger Range, keeping mostly to himself after his retirement. Good heart, but damaged, she had said, like most men who saw war and came home with more ghosts than medals. It was nearly dark when Lucas pulled off the main road and onto a narrower trail, lined with snow-covered brush and towering pine. The gravel crackled beneath the tires as he followed the address deeper into the woods. Finally, nestled between two ridgelines, he found it. A squat cabin with smoke rising lazily from a metal chimney, a rusted red truck parked out front, and wind chimes made of bullet casings jingling softly on the porch. He parked beside the truck, stepped out, and Rusty lifted his head in the back seat with a faint wag of his tail. "Stay here, bud," Lucas whispered. The front door opened before he could knock. Walter Granger was a tall man, though slightly stooped with age. His shoulders were broad but sloped, and his frame, once likely powerful, had been trimmed down by time and solitude. He wore a worn flannel shirt under a heavy wool vest, faded jeans tucked into snow-stained boots, and a green army cap that clung stubbornly to his head. His beard was wild and gray, his eyes surprisingly sharp, a pale steel blue that held the kind of stillness only found in people who've witnessed unspeakable things and learned to carry them quietly. "You're Lucas Miller," he said, his voice gravelly but not unfriendly. Lucas hesitated. "How did you—" "I figured you'd come. Didn't know when, but dogs don't carry stories without eventually bringing someone to the end of them." Walter stepped aside, motioning him in. "Bring the dog if you like. He knows the place." Lucas opened the car door. Rusty struggled to stand but managed, tail thumping once against the seat, before he limped out into the snow and followed Lucas up the stairs, pausing briefly at the door as if to recognize the frame. Walter gave the dog a quiet nod, like acknowledging an old comrade, and shut the door behind them. Inside, the cabin was warm and dimly lit, smelling of wood smoke, black coffee, and aged leather. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting flickers across the room. Walls were lined with framed photos, medals, and shelves of yellowing books. A wool blanket lay folded neatly on the couch, and there was a handmade wooden bowl with a dog's name burned into the side, Milo. Walter motioned for Lucas to sit. Rusty padded slowly to the rug in front of the fire and lay down with a long exhale, his body finally relaxing. "I didn't change his name," Walter said, settling into a heavy armchair beside the fire. "They did. When I picked him up, the paperwork called him Milo. I didn't have the heart to rename him again." Lucas sat on the edge of the couch. "So it's true. You adopted him." "Not quite. I rescued him," Walter said. 5 years ago, from a place that shouldn't exist. I'd been volunteering with a rescue group up near Haven. They asked me to evaluate a dog that had been labeled unfit for adoption. Behavioral issues, they said. Dangerous, aggressive. They wanted to put him down quietly. Lucas looked at Rusty, his heart thudding. "Why didn't they?" "Because I said no." Walter leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When I looked in his eyes, I saw something I've seen in a lot of soldiers. He wasn't angry. He was grieving, wounded, waiting." He paused, then gestured to the hearth. "Every morning, that dog walked out to the end of my path and sat there, always facing the same direction, toward the Bridger Mountains, toward Bozeman. I didn't know why at the time, but he never missed a day." Lucas stared at Rusty, who was now dozing lightly by the fire, his chest rising and falling in soft, slow rhythms. Walter stood, crossed to a narrow drawer beside a shelf, and opened it. He pulled out a plastic bag, weathered and creased. Inside was a photo, wrinkled at the edges, faintly stained, but intact. He handed it to Lucas without a word. Lucas recognized it immediately. A photo taken when he was 16, standing in the backyard of the old house, Rusty at his side, both of them grinning in the summer light. He remembered the day. His grandmother had called them inside for lemonade just moments later. "I found it tucked under the dog's blanket the day I brought him home," Walter said. "It was wrapped in part of a sock, buried deep in the folds, like he was trying to hold on to something." Lucas's voice caught in his throat. "You kept it all these years?" Walter nodded slowly. Didn't seem right to throw away what mattered most to him. They sat in silence for several minutes. The fire crackled. Rusty sighed in his sleep. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but the cabin held firm, warm, quiet, steady. "You said the place you got him from shouldn't exist," Lucas said finally. "Why?" Walter's eyes narrowed. "Because it wasn't a rescue. It was a warehouse. Dogs in cages, no names, no records, just numbers. Ones that didn't pass got marked. I had to lie to get him out." Lucas clenched his fists. "They said he was aggressive?" Walter nodded. "He wouldn't let anyone touch him, but he never bit, just barked. Cried at night, cried toward the east." Lucas looked back down at the photo in his hands. The boy he once was. The dog who never forgot. And a stranger who had stepped in when everyone else walked away. "Why'd you let him go?" Lucas asked softly. Walter exhaled. "Because he stopped crying. One morning, he didn't walk to the end of the path. He just stared at me. Then one day, he was gone. Slipped out during the night. I searched. I really did. But I think he finally knew which direction to go." Bozeman's evening light hung low and golden beneath the cloud line, stretching long, cold shadows across the snow as Lucas stood outside a modest ranch-style house on Willow Creek Drive. The air was still, the kind of sharp winter quiet that makes every small movement sound like a secret being confessed. In his coat pocket, Lucas clutched the photo Walter had given him like it might crumble if he let it go. Rusty lay curled in the back seat of the car, resting but watching. Always watching. The house looked like it hadn't changed in years. Siding faded from blue to gray, front steps uneven, porch light humming faintly above a crooked mailbox. Lucas's breath fogged before him as he reached out and knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing Martin Langley, Lucas's cousin. 2 years older, but with a face that always looked 10 years more weathered. Martin stood just under 6 feet, with a stocky frame and slumped shoulders. His black hair had thinned at the crown, and his face carried deep-set eyes, slightly bloodshot, and lines etched not just by age, but by avoidance. He wore a threadbare sweatshirt and old jeans, and the smell of cigarette smoke clung faintly to his clothes. "Lucas," he said, surprised, the name barely forming before he stepped aside. "I figured I'd see you sooner or later." Lucas walked past him without a word, his boots dripping snow onto the old wood floor. The house inside was warm but dim, cluttered with unopened mail and a flickering TV in the corner playing some crime drama with the sound muted. A half-eaten plate of food sat forgotten on the table. "I know what you did," Lucas said without turning around. "I found the file, the transfer form. You signed it." Martin exhaled, then rubbed the back of his neck. "You should sit down." Lucas stayed standing. Martin took a seat at the kitchen table, leaning on his elbows, staring down at his fingers. "It was 6 years ago, man. Everything was falling apart. Your dad died, your grandma was overwhelmed, and Rusty wasn't acting right." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "Not acting right?" Martin nodded, still not meeting his gaze. "He barked all night, scratched the floor. He kept going back to your dad's office, same spot, same corner, wouldn't eat, wouldn't let anyone touch him. He was grieving," Lucas snapped. "He was terrified," Martin replied. "And so were we. You weren't there." Lucas took a step forward. "So you just... what? Called some shelter and had him taken away?" Martin's shoulders tensed. "No. I found a place that dealt with trauma cases, behavioral rehabs. I didn't take him to the pound. I thought, hell, I don't know what I thought, that he'd get help, that maybe someone could reset whatever broke in him that night." Lucas's voice dropped, low and cold. "And you didn't tell me. You were breaking too." Martin stood now, hands open in front of him. "You didn't eat for days. You couldn't speak at your dad's service. You think I was going to drop on you that your dog was losing his mind?" Lucas stared at him, breathing hard, his jaw clenched. After a long pause, Martin sighed and walked to a small drawer under the TV stand. He opened it and returned with a small black USB drive. "I didn't know what to do with this," he said quietly. "I found it a few weeks after everything happened. It's from the security cam your dad had installed in the study. Motion triggered. I never told anyone." Lucas took the USB with slow, careful fingers, his stomach turning. "You watched it?" Martin hesitated. "Just enough. It scared me. I didn't want it to mean anything." Lucas pocketed the drive. You didn't want it to mean anything, but it meant everything to Rusty. Martin lowered his eyes. I know. Lucas turned toward the door, but paused. He waited, every winter, in front of the house, waiting for someone to come home. Martin didn't respond. His silence hung heavier than any apology. Back at the lodge, the room felt smaller somehow. The fire crackled quietly in the stove, casting golden light across the wooden floor. Lucas plugged the USB into his laptop with slow, deliberate movements. Rusty rested nearby, eyes half closed, but his ears perked at the sound of the machine waking up. The screen lit with grainy footage, time-stamped 6 years prior. A single camera angle from the corner of his father's office, tilted toward the desk. Lucas leaned in, his breath slowing as he clicked play. The office was dark. Snow flickered in the window, barely visible. A shadow moved in the corner. Not his father, not Martin, not anyone he recognized at first. A man, tall, with a hood pulled low, moved to the desk and bent down. He placed something under it, a small box maybe. Then he straightened, stood still for a moment. That's when a sound broke through the silent video, muffled barking, scratching. The camera picked it up faintly. Rusty. The dog's shape became visible in the glass reflection of the door, barking, pawing at the barrier. The man inside hesitated, then turned off the desk lamp and slipped out the back. The timestamp ended minutes before the call about the accident. Lucas sat frozen. He rewound the video again, pausing on the man's face as he glanced toward the door. Not clear enough to identify, but familiar. Something in the jawline, the posture. It wasn't a stranger. Rusty stirred beside him, standing slowly, pressing his head against Lucas's knee. You knew, Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible. You were trying to warn us. Rusty looked up, and in that gaze, tired, aged but still alive, Lucas saw what 6 years of silence had carried. Truth and devotion. The next morning broke cold and brittle, a wind carving down from the mountains and dragging sharp blades of air across the snow-covered ground. Lucas stood in front of the sliding glass door of the lodge room, his reflection pale in the frosted glass. The world outside was hushed, blanketed in a deceptive calm. Inside, the silence was heavier, full of the weight of truth, unearthed too late. Rusty lay curled on the rug, still recovering, but stronger now. He raised his head when Lucas moved, his brown eyes alert, always watching. Lucas ran a hand down the dog's back, feeling the warmth, the life that had survived where so many things hadn't. Lucas had barely slept. The image from the security footage, the man slipping into his father's office, planting something beneath the desk, looped in his mind like a curse. He had paused the video at least a dozen times, zooming in, trying to see what his heart already knew, but his brain refused to accept. Now, in the gray light of morning, he had no more excuses. He grabbed his coat, zipped it up with shaking fingers, and picked up the USB. Let's go, he said quietly. Rusty stood with a grunt and limped to the door beside him. Lucas carried him into the car with practiced care, then turned toward the Bozeman Police Department, a red brick building nestled between a bank and the courthouse. The flag out front flapped against a slate sky. Inside, the warmth was stark, almost suffocating after the chill. Lucas approached the front desk, where a woman in her early 40s sat behind a pane of plexiglass. Her nameplate read, Detective E. Rhodes. She had dark, tightly coiled hair pulled into a bun, almond-toned skin, and sharp cheekbones that gave her an almost sculpted look. Her eyes, however, were tired, intelligent but wary, as if constantly prepared for disappointment. I have something, Lucas said. It's about an accident, 6 years ago. John Miller, he was my father. Detective Rhodes blinked slowly. That was ruled a vehicle malfunction. Lucas nodded. I know, but I don't think it was. I have video from the night he died. She tilted her head, gesturing for him to sit at a side counter. You mind showing me? Lucas plugged the USB into her desktop terminal. As the footage played, Rhodes leaned in, her brow furrowing as the shadowy figure appeared on screen, as Rusty barked frantically outside the door. That's not a coincidence, she murmured. I think it's Seth Harding, Lucas said quietly. He was my dad's business partner, helped manage contracts and the insurance paperwork. After the crash, he handled most of the estate. Detective Rhodes didn't respond right away. She rewound the video, watching again. Then she leaned back, arms crossed. "And you say this was hidden?" "My cousin found it, never told anyone," she exhaled. "We closed this case a long time ago, but this—" She looked at Rusty, who sat quietly by Lucas's feet. "This dog, he was there?" Lucas nodded. "He's the only one who saw it all." That afternoon, Lucas sat in a corner of the lobby, sipping a bitter cup of machine-made coffee while officers moved quietly through the department. Detective Rhodes had taken the drive into an internal review room. Hours passed. Rusty slept, his head resting on Lucas's boot. At 4:47 p.m., she returned, a file in her hands. Her expression was more focused now, colder. "We opened a formal reinvestigation," she said. "Harding's name is in every corner of your father's insurance adjustments. There's a record of a policy update just 2 weeks before the crash. Tripled the payout." Lucas's breath hitched. "And he signed it?" "Your father did. But the signature is shaky. Might have been forged. We'll pull handwriting analysis." She paused, then added, "There's something else. Harding was under scrutiny in Colorado last year. Real estate fraud. The case didn't go to trial, but it fits a pattern." Lucas leaned back, the walls around him tilting slightly. "You're saying—" "I'm saying he had motive, access, and opportunity. And your dog might have just saved this case." Later that evening, as Lucas stepped outside into the freezing dusk, Rusty beside him, he felt something crack. Not painfully, but like a shell opening. The town no longer felt haunted. It felt honest. Cold, yes, but honest. As they reached the car, Lucas looked down at Rusty. "You were never broken," he whispered. "You were just unheard." Rusty didn't wag, didn't bark. He simply looked up, eyes steady. The morning sunlight was filtered and soft, pale gold slipping through a sky the color of pearl. Snow still blanketed every surface in Bozeman, but after days of storm, the air had stilled. It no longer bit, no longer fought. It just existed, quiet and watchful, like a town finally exhaling. Lucas stood on the roadside, the engine of the Subaru idling behind him. He hadn't returned to the old house since that night in the attic. But today, with the investigation underway, the past cracked open, and the weight of silence lifted. Something inside him shifted. He wasn't just coming back. He was coming home. Rusty sat beside him on the sidewalk, wrapped in a soft blanket that Lucas had folded into a makeshift sling around the dog's shoulders. The old retriever's gait was slower now, his joints stiff from cold and years, but his head was high, ears flicking gently in the wind. His fur had regained a soft sheen under Lucas's care, and though the scars of hardship still marked his limbs, his spirit held steady. Lucas walked slowly toward the front steps, each footstep crunching on the icy path. The house hadn't changed in structure. The siding was still faded blue-gray, the porch railing still bowed slightly to the left. But the feeling it gave off was different now. It no longer felt like a closed chapter. It felt like the beginning of something unfinished. As he reached the first step, Rusty climbed beside him. The dog paused at the third step, the same one he had stopped at in every whispered tale from town, every ghost story passed from neighbor to neighbor. Lucas stood still and waited. Rusty stepped forward, onto the porch. No hesitation this time. He walked to the door, sniffed it once, and then curled up right against it. No scratching, no barking, just stillness. Acceptance. As though he had finally been granted permission to stop searching. Lucas blinked hard, eyes stinging with something warm. He sat beside the dog on the wooden planks, snow melting beneath them. "You always knew," he whispered. Behind them, the rattle of tires on slush drew their attention. A tan SUV slowed near the house, the driver rolling down the window. "Lucas Miller," the woman called. She had curly red hair pulled back in a braid, pale freckles along her nose, and wore a brown canvas coat with a badge clipped to the front pocket. "Detective Rhodes asked me to stop by. My name's Claire Sanderson, County Records Office." Lucas stood, brushing his hands on his coat. "Yeah, that's me." Claire stepped out of the car with a manila envelope in hand. She was in her early 30s, slender but strong in posture, her eyes quick and confident. "Detective Rhodes said you might be wanting to make this place yours again. She asked me to expedite the title search and legacy file. The property hasn't changed ownership since your grandmother passed, and the estate is still in your name. Lucas blinked. You did all that? Already? Claire gave a small shrug. There's something about a dog waiting on a porch for 6 years that makes a lot of people want to help. Lucas took the envelope. Inside was everything he needed. Deed transfer documents, county assessor files, even a list of local contractors should he want to renovate. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Thank you, he finally managed. Claire smiled softly. Thank him, she said, nodding at Rusty, who lifted his head faintly, eyes blinking slowly. After she drove off, Lucas sat beside Rusty again. He unfolded the documents and stared at them in the weak sunlight. You waited for me to come back, he said quietly. Now it's my turn. That afternoon, Lucas cleaned the porch for the first time in years. He swept away ice and dirt, threw out the rusted watering can that had sat frozen against the railing. He rehung the wind chime that had fallen the winter after his father's death. The sound was soft and irregular, but it rang. Inside, he lit a fire in the living room. It took effort. The chimney hadn't been cleaned in a while, but soon the room was glowing with warmth that didn't feel borrowed. He spread out a blanket for Rusty by the hearth and brought in the old dog bed from the trunk of the Subaru. Rusty sniffed it once, circled, and laid down with a long, contented sigh. The house creaked, not in protest, but in recognition, like wood stretching after a long sleep. Later, Lucas found himself standing in the doorway of his childhood bedroom. The bed was gone, the walls bare. He walked over to the far corner and knelt, brushing aside a thin layer of dust. On the floorboard, a faint series of scratches remained. He'd carved his initials there when he was 10. Next to them, a crude, shaky heart and the letters R+L. He smiled, lips trembling. He didn't cry, not exactly, but something in him softened, melted. Not like ice under the sun, but like something cracked finally settling into place. Rusty hobbled into the room, tail swaying once. Lucas turned and sat down cross-legged on the floor. The dog curled beside him, laying his head on Lucas's thigh. We're home now, Lucas whispered. No more leaving. The days that followed settled like snowflakes. Soft, quiet, and slow. Each one unique, yet somehow the same. Winter in Bozeman never hurried, and neither did Lucas now. The house he had feared to return to had become a sanctuary, and the silence that once haunted the rooms was now filled with breath, with warmth, with a sense of life returned. Mornings began the same way. Lucas would rise before dawn, shrug into a thick wool coat, and lace up his snow boots. Rusty, still stiff in his joints but determined, would rise as well, his gait uneven but full of purpose. The old dog no longer limped so much as swayed gently with each step, his tail lifting just slightly, his ears twitching at the sound of wind through pine. Together, they would walk down the snow-packed trail behind the house, where the forest opened into a wide, frost-glazed meadow. It was here that Lucas spoke most freely, about his father, about regret, about memory. He spoke softly, not expecting an answer, but always grateful that someone listened. By midday, they'd returned to the cabin where Lucas would stoke the fire in the living room. The warmth of burning cedar would fill the space, and Rusty would stretch beside the hearth, his golden coat catching firelight like an ember refusing to die out. Lucas had begun placing a notebook by the window, where he'd once carved his initials into the sill. It was a blank journal, but day by day, he filled it with thoughts. Not code, not reports, just truths. It was during one of these afternoons, sitting by the fire with Rusty's head resting on his foot, that Lucas realized what he had to do. His story, Rusty's story, wasn't meant to end here, quiet and forgotten. It had weight. It had purpose. And there were others out there, dogs like Rusty, lost in systems, labeled aggressive, abandoned not because they were broken, but because they were misunderstood. The idea came to him fully formed. He would call it Rusty's Way. By the end of that week, Lucas had set up a small website. Nothing fancy, just a landing page with a photo of Rusty on the porch and a simple message. Some dogs aren't lost, they're just waiting to be found. The story followed. Every word was honest, raw, and simple. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. Rusty's years of waiting had said enough. The page spread faster than Lucas expected. Within a week, he had emails from across Montana, people asking if they could volunteer, foster, or donate. One of the first responses came from a woman named Maya Keller, a former veterinary nurse in Missoula. She was 36, tall and athletic, with deep-set hazel eyes and hair cut short for practical reasons. Maya had left the city a year prior after burning out in emergency care, now running a quiet animal sanctuary in the Bitterroot Valley. Her email was direct but kind. I read Rusty's story. I've seen too many like him. If you're serious, I can help you build this the right way. Ethically, practically long-term. Let's talk. They spoke that weekend. Maya was brisk, no nonsense, but her voice softened every time she mentioned animals. She told Lucas stories of dogs labeled unfit because they growled once during an exam, cats dumped because they had one blind eye, parrots surrendered because they cried at night. Lucas listened. Then he told her about Rusty in full. Not the public story, the real one, the attic, the footage, the porch. By the end of the call, Maya was quiet. "You know what this is?" she asked. "This isn't just a rescue effort. This is a reckoning, and I want in." Together they drafted a mission statement. Rusty's way would fight for the forgotten. Animals dismissed for behavior shaped by trauma, not malice. Every dog had a history. Everyone deserved a chance to rewrite it. By January, Lucas had filed the paperwork to register the nonprofit. Maya began assembling a small team, behavioral experts, field volunteers, a retired logistics officer named Drew, who had built his career coordinating disaster relief. Lucas, despite his background in tech, took the most analog role, outreach. He visited shelters, talked to directors, told Rusty's story not as a miracle, but as a failure of assumption. In the meantime, life at home remained simple. Evenings were for slow dinners, grilled cheese, soup, sometimes just apples and peanut butter, and quiet companionship. Rusty's strength returned bit by bit. His tail wagged more often. He no longer startled at every creak of the floorboards. He began sleeping deeper, stretching longer, snoring lightly. One evening, Lucas walked out onto the porch, a mug of tea in hand, and watched the snow fall. Rusty followed, sitting beside him, eyes narrowed at the wind. "You did this," Lucas whispered. "You brought us here." Behind him, the house glowed warm. Inside was the desk where he now answered emails from across the country. Inside was a whiteboard with names of dogs flagged for evaluation. Dogs who might now get a second chance. Lucas knelt and kissed Rusty's head gently. The dog leaned into him, not with urgency, but with contentment. "You're not just my story," Lucas said. "You're theirs too." And the snow kept falling, soft as breath, steady as a promise. The sky was clear for the first time in days, a deep crystalline blue stretching endlessly over Bozeman. The early morning light fell in thin ribbons across the snow-covered earth, softening the sharp edges of fences and rooftops, painting the trees in a gentle gold. It was a quiet kind of cold, the kind that hummed in your lungs when you breathed and stung only a little as it reminded you that winter wasn't finished yet. Lucas stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee steaming in his hands, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan over flannel and thermals. His breath clouded the air as he exhaled slowly, eyes still heavy from sleep, but heart calm. The cabin had become home, not just shelter, not just a return, but a place where the past had been honored and the future was gently unfolding. Rusty lay already on the porch, where he'd been since dawn. He hadn't barked or moved when Lucas opened the door. He was curled with his body facing the woods, his face tilted toward the warming horizon. His coat, once brittle and broken, was now brushed smooth with strands of white threading through the gold, like snow melting into fire. Lucas stepped closer and knelt beside him, setting his coffee down on the floorboards. He placed a hand on Rusty's shoulder. It was warm, still, quiet. Rusty didn't lift his head. Lucas leaned down. The old retriever's chest was still. His breath gone, passed between one sunrise and the next. There was no struggle in the way he lay, no tension in the limbs. His head was resting gently on Lucas's worn leather boot, as if he had fallen asleep in peace. Lucas's throat closed slowly, not from panic, but from a wave of emotion so deep it anchored him in place. He ran a hand down Rusty's back, then whispered, "You found your way home." The wind shifted. Light caught the porch railing and flickered across the dog's fur. Lucas didn't cry. Not yet. He just sat beside him, knees bent, one hand gently resting against Rusty's neck. fingers feeling the absence, but honoring the presence that remained in memory and breath. Minutes passed, then an hour. Snow began to fall again. Thin, delicate flakes that drifted in spirals before settling on Lucas's shoulders, his lap, his hair. Some melted, some stayed. He didn't move. He couldn't. Not until the wind stilled again. Eventually, he lifted Rusty gently and wrapped him in the same wool blanket that had carried him out of that snowy roadside nearly 2 months earlier. He brought him down to the grove near the trail where they used to walk. The land there was soft and quiet, nestled among pine trees that swayed gently like mourners in a chapel. He dug the grave with his own hands, the earth frozen at first, but loosening as the sun lifted higher. He laid Rusty down with a folded photo tucked beneath his paw, the one from Walter, faded now but still whole. He placed a smooth stone at the head, painted in simple black letters. Rusty, the dog who waited, the friend who found the way home. That evening, Lucas sat on the porch with a cup of tea instead of coffee, wrapped in the same cardigan. The silence around him was not empty. It was full of breathless memory, of snow-packed mornings, fire-lit nights, the steady thump of a tail on the floor. It was full of presence. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Maya. New intake today. A senior golden left behind in a foreclosed home. Thought of Rusty. You ready for another? Lucas stared at the message. His fingers hovered over the screen. Then he typed, Yes, let's give them all away home. He looked out at the woods, at the sky folding into dusk, and whispered, We keep going, bud. I'll carry the rest. Rusty had left, yes, but the bond never did. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not loud. They don't come with thunder or signs from the sky. Sometimes, they come on 4 legs, covered in frost, with eyes that remember even when the world forgets. Rusty didn't speak in words, but in patience. He didn't need to shout. His loyalty was louder than any voice. This story is more than about a lost dog and a grieving man. It is about the quiet ways God works in our lives, through waiting, through heartbreak, through the return of something we thought was gone forever. Rusty waited, not because he was lost, but because he believed. And in that belief, we see something divine, a reminder that even when we wander, even when we fall silent, God still finds ways to lead us home. Maybe your Rusty isn't a dog. Maybe it's a broken dream, a lost friend, or a wound that hasn't healed. But just like Rusty, what's meant for you will wait. It will return when the time is right, when your heart is open. So, today let this story remind us, love remembers, faith returns, and hope, real, sacred hope, never gives up. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment with amen if you believe that miracles still walk among us, even in the shape of an old dog on a snowy porch. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story filled with faith, healing, and the gentle hand of God. May He bless you and your loved ones, and may you always find your way home.